I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me also thank Ms. Goto and Ms. Wosono for their very clear briefings. Denmark welcomes the participation of Ukraine in today's briefing, as well as other affected European countries. The broader regional security situation remains alarming. Denmark is deeply concerned by Monday's explosion on a railway line in Poland. This was an act of sabotage directed against the security of the Polish state and its citizens. Denmark stands in full solidarity with Poland. Mr. President, it is almost 2 months since the Council last discussed Ukraine. Regrettably, Russia's attacks on Ukraine's population and civilian infrastructure have continued unabated, as we have clearly heard from our briefers. Ukraine again witnessed a deadly mass attack on its cities yesterday, with over 500 drones and missiles fired in a single night. At least 25 civilians were killed and 66 injured when the residential block, their home, was hit. We condemn this attack, as we do all attacks against Ukraine's civilians, and express our sincere condolences to the victims. The recent increase in attacks on Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure is deeply cynical, especially in light of the approaching winter. Deliberately denying the civilian population the means to keep warm, to cook, to light up their homes and access clean drinking water represents a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Another troubling development is the attack on electricity substations and transmission lines connected to nuclear power plants in Ukraine. This recklessly threatens the safe operation of civilian nuclear energy facilities. As we prepare to mark the 40th anniversary of the Chernobyl accident, we recall that this fallout did not respect national borders and impacted hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. We call for an immediate halt to these attacks that could lead to another nuclear accident with disastrous consequences. Mr. President, the deadly strike on a kindergarten in Kharkiv on the 22nd of October stands as a symbol of Russia's disregard for civilian lives. 1 person was killed, 9 were wounded, and it was only through the bravery of Ukraine's first responders that 48 young children trapped in the burning building were saved. Unbelievably, that was not the only Russian attack on Ukraine's children that same week. On the 29th of October, Russian artillery shelled the Kherson's Children's Hospital, injuring 9 civilians, including 4 children. Russia's illegal war of aggression is having a terrible impact on Ukraine's children, including the thousands forcibly transferred and deported by the Russian authorities. International monitors and humanitarian organizations need to verify their situation, safeguard their rights, and secure their swift return to Ukraine. It is our duty to act, to defend the fundamental rights of those too young to raise their own voices. On the human rights situation in the temporarily occupied territories, we recall the Independent International Commission of Inquiry's latest report. It documents serious crimes against humanity committed by Russia's armed forces. These independent findings of the most severe violations of international law demand decisive action. Mr. President, months ago, Ukraine offered an unconditional and comprehensive ceasefire. This genuine offer still stands. Russia, on the contrary, has only offered empty promises while continuing to attack Ukraine's civilian population. We call on Russia to accept the offer of a ceasefire without delay. Denmark welcomes conversations about peace for Ukraine, peace talks that can lead to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. A lasting peace is, however, only possible if it's based on the principles of the UN Charter, in full respect of Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. What is needed is a peace where Ukrainians can live in security, a peace with credible security guarantees to ensure this war cannot restart in the near future, a peace that does not reward the aggressor, leaving other countries constantly wondering if they will be next. Mr. President, Let me conclude by reiterating Denmark's steadfast support to Ukraine and by reaffirming our fundamental position. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Nothing about European security without Europe. Millions of Ukrainian men, women, and children have suffered more than enough for far too long. They deserve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. A ceasefire remains the indispensable first step on this path. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to begin by thanking Ms. Kayoko Goto, Acting Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, as well as Ms. Edem Wasono, Director of Operations at the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. I thank them for their briefings and for telling us about a conflict that has lasted far too long. Mr. President, a ceasefire is needed. France calls on all members of the Council to unite around a complete, immediate and unconditional ceasefire, which has also been requested by the Secretary General of the United Nations. It calls on Russia to accept it and to engage in good faith in peace negotiations. The cessation of hostilities is a demand of the vast majority of the international community, as was shown recently by the official positions of the Group of Friends of Peace. Ukraine has repeated many times that it is prepared for a ceasefire. It accepted that in March when it was proposed by the United States. Ukraine has also for months expressed its readiness for peace negotiations at the highest level. Russia, on the contrary, continues to intensify its strikes on Ukrainian territory and multiplies its delaying maneuvers which fool no one. Ending this Russian aggression is a flagrant violation of the principles of the UN Charter. Stopping it is everyone's responsibility. Allowing aggression to achieve its aims would open the door on every continent to aggressive policies of revising borders, in violation of the territorial integrity and sovereign equality of states. Mr. President, the reports the Council has just heard remind us, if it were necessary, of the unacceptable humanitarian situation that Russia continues to impose on Ukrainian civilians. 26 dead, including 3 children and nearly 100 civilians in the city of Ternopil alone during the night of the 18th to the 19th of November. A few days earlier, a hospital and an embassy were hit in the capital in violation of international humanitarian law and the Vienna Convention. Among civilians, Russia also targets journalists. On the 3rd of October, French photojournalist Anthony Lalican was killed in a Russian drone strike while carrying out his work and while he was wearing a press vest that clearly identified him. As winter approaches, and as every year since 2022, Russia is relentlessly attacking energy infrastructure. After thermal power plants and gas storage facilities, even electrical substations connected to nuclear power plants are not spared by these strikes, endangering nuclear safety and security, as the Director General of the IAEA has reiterated. By imposing long power outages and sometimes heating and running water outages, Russia is once again seeking to break the resistance of the Ukrainian people. But the Ukrainian people are resisting. Mr. President, France unequivocally condemns the continuation of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, as well as its irresponsible incursions of the Russian forces into the airspace of the European Union and NATO, and its serious acts of sabotage and destabilization in Europe. France recalls its unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity, reaffirmed yesterday by the United Nations General Assembly. The visit of the Ukrainian president to Paris this week, which enabled the signing of a declaration of intent on the delivery of 100 Rafale fighter jets to Ukraine, shows that France is continuing its commitment, along with all of its partners, to increase its long-term support. We are working towards a just and lasting peace. That is, a peace that does not mean Ukraine's capitulation, that preserves Ukraine's ability to exercise its right to self-defense and that makes it possible to prevent future aggression in full respect for the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank Ms. Kayoko Goto and Ms. Idem Wosono for their pertinent briefings. Almost 2 months after our last meeting on Ukraine in this chamber, Russia has intensified its missile and drone strikes on Ukraine. Latest reports indicate direct targeting of residential buildings and other civilian infrastructure across the country, while Ukraine's energy capabilities, with possible severe repercussions on nuclear safety, are being systematically destroyed. The numbers we just heard from our briefers are telling of the plight of civilians in Ukraine forced by Russia to survive another harsh winter in the cold and in the darkness. For the fourth consecutive year, energy needs are weaponized, with the most vulnerable groups, women, children, and the elderly, bearing the brunt of aggression. More than 3,000 children have been killed or injured in the course of this war. And today, on World Children's Day, we can't help but think of all the children whose lives and dreams were cut short. We also firmly support international efforts to ensure the safe return to Ukraine of all Ukrainian children unlawfully deported and transferred to Russia and Belarus. Once more, Greece reiterates its resolute condemnation of the massive civilian harm caused by such strikes as a blatant violation of international humanitarian law. On this occasion, we would like to express our deep sorrow for yesterday's horrendous, massive earth attacks, which targeted various Ukrainian cities and resulted to the death of 25 civilians, including 3 children. We also condemn all attacks against diplomatic missions in violation of the Vienna Convention, and we echo the Secretary General in recalling the principle of the inviolability of diplomatic premises. This war of aggression against Ukraine has broader repercussions for global peace and stability. The spillover effect of violence has affected Poland and other neighboring countries and risks to spiral out of control. Russian attacks in the Black Sea endanger lives, pose immense environmental risks, and have ripple effects on energy, food, and maritime security, as well as on supply chains on a global scale. Mr. President, Greece has consistently backed all efforts to put an end to the war in Ukraine. We call on Russia to abandon the path of escalation and engage with the US and Ukraine in goodwill. We stress the need for a full and unconditional ceasefire as a first step toward launching a genuine process that will ensure a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. In full compliance with international law, the UN Charter, relevant General Assembly resolutions, and the Helsinki Final Act. This is clearly the urgent request of the vast majority of the UN membership. Greece reaffirms its firm and unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within internationally recognized borders, a principled stance rooted in respect for international law, the UN Charter, and consistent with the belief that the use of force cannot be tolerated. For Greece, the inviolability of borders is non-negotiable. Greece will continue to stand by Ukraine, and through the new vertical gas corridor will contribute decisively to meeting Ukraine's natural gas needs for the upcoming winter. Mr. President, it is also clear that no peace decisions for Ukraine can be taken without Ukraine. We will continue supporting an independent, democratic, and sovereign future for Ukraine, founded on credible and robust security guarantees which will deter any recurrence of armed aggression and allow Ukraine to defend itself effectively. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would also like to join colleagues in thanking Ms. Goto and Ms. Vasonu for their respective briefings. President, Pakistan expresses its profound concern over the continued hostilities that are, in fact, perpetuating the conflict in Ukraine. Well into its fourth year, the conflict has had deep impact on regional and international security landscape. The relentless fighting has also resulted in immense human suffering, and the risk of regional spillover remains a major concern. We are deeply perturbed by the expansion of hostilities, targeting of civilians and civil infrastructure, and the exponentially mounting humanitarian toll. Protection of civilian lives and infrastructures should remain paramount. We reiterate the call for upholding international humanitarian law. Now, almost everyone has been saying for some time that there is no military solution to this conflict. Each day of continued fighting only deepens the wounds and the ongoing tragedy and moving the parties further away from reaching a political settlement. We again call upon the parties to demonstrate restraint, take meaningful strides towards de-escalation, and work earnestly towards a ceasefire through a sustained and meaningful dialogue process. President, we deeply regret that the diplomatic momentum generated at the start of the year by adoption of Security Council Resolution 2774, which perhaps could have been more effective if it were endorsed unanimously, and followed by multiple rounds of dialogue between the two sides, as well as continuing efforts led by President Trump to bring an end to this conflict, are yet to bear fruit. In this context, we welcome the renewed push for peace, including mediation efforts by Turkey and Qatar. A solution that is acceptable to all parties can, in fact, silence the guns and ensure lasting peace. Mindful of the complex historical context and the intricate nature of this conflict, we believe that path forward should be guided by wisdom and dialogue rather than continued hostilities and an environment of confrontation. We therefore urge all parties to demonstrate political will, to engage in a meaningful, structured, and result-oriented dialogue that addresses the security concerns of all sides, and most importantly, is anchored in the principles of the UN Charter and international law, and respects the relevant multilateral agreements. A ceasefire is the first logical and necessary step in this process. Pakistan is a firm believer in the power of dialogue and diplomacy and will continue to support all endeavors aimed at resolving the issue peacefully and in a just, comprehensive, and durable manner. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Ms. Goto and Ms. Wasonu for their briefing today, and I welcome the participation of the representative of Ukraine, along with other countries of the region. Colleagues, Today, on World Children's Day, we are reminded of the Ukrainian children who've become victims of Russia's illegal invasion and imperialist warmongering. Of the nearly 53,000 verified civilian casualties from the start of the full-scale invasion, more than 3,000 have been children. These figures don't include the attack 2 nights ago, which reportedly killed a further 26 people, including 3 children. Russia has destroyed 358 educational institutions through aerial bombardments and damaged a further 3,161. Just last month, as we've heard, Russian strikes hit a kindergarten in Kharkiv. These attacks are part of a larger pattern. Russia is ramping up its attacks on civilian and energy infrastructure, directly resulting in even greater humanitarian crisis as winter sets in. Since May, Russia has launched the 32 largest air attacks of the entire war. The latest UN Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine report has concluded that Russia's repeated attacks with short-range drones against civilians amount to crimes against humanity and war crimes. But aerial attacks are not the only threat that Ukrainian children face. The Russian government has forcibly transferred children from their homes and communities. This is a naked attempt to erase Ukrainian identity and with it, Ukraine's future. Let's be clear. These actions are signs of desperation. Russia's victory is not inevitable. They've been throwing everything at Ukraine, but have made only minor territorial gains in the past 4 years. And Russia's losses are unsustainable. Over 1 million soldiers have been killed or wounded. The cost of war for Russia is mounting. Military spending has increased to $159 billion this year, over a third of their total budget. Money that could be spent on the well-being of Russian citizens. Yet while the rest of the world calls for a ceasefire, Russia refuses. Since March, President Zelensky has offered an unconditional ceasefire. But President Putin has repeatedly shown that he's not serious about ending this war. Everyone in this chamber has taken on the responsibility to uphold international peace and security. Everyone in this chamber should do everything in their power to pressure Russia to agree to a ceasefire. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Somalia.